This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Hi listeners, this is Brent Sutton. Welcome to the 59th episode of the Practice of Learning Teams podcast show. Before we start today's podcast, I wanted to share with you two important pieces of information. This week is Todd Conklin's birthday, and it's a very special birthday for Todd, and I wish him a very happy birthday from everyone in the New View community. We owe a lot to you, Todd, and your work and your wisdom that you continue to share with us on our journey of learning and improving. Thank you very much. The second piece of news is the release of the Learning from Everyday Work white paper with contributions from Todd Conklin, Brent Robinson and Jeffrey Liff. I'm so pleased that Jeff, who runs the Safety Differently Forum, has joined us in this white paper. The white paper is available at no cost from our website at learningteamscommunity.com, or you can download the Kindle or purchase the book version on Amazon at very little cost. Now back to our show. The Brazilian community is doing some amazing activities in the New View space with community leaders like Hugo Ribeiro. Over the next 3 months, I want to share with you some more local stories about what is happening in the Brazilian community. On today's show, I welcome Rafael Santos from Sao Paulo, Brazil, who is diligently implementing HOP and learning teams in his organisation. His focus on people development and using HOP and learning teams to drive continuous improvement is a great story to hear. Please sit back and enjoy this conversation with Rafael Santos.
Well, welcome, Rafael, to the show. And of course, it's afternoon for you and morning for us. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's, I must say I'm a little anxious, I'm a little nervous, but I was very excited when I got invited. I'm a big fan of the show, big fan of your book and of your work, so it's great to be here.
No, look, thank you. And think of this like a learning team. Think of it that you're participating in sharing a story about your journey. And we're going to create a little area of psychological safety for you as we move along. So, but welcome to it. And I think once again, I reached out to you because always talking about different things, which I think is great. And I thought it was a great opportunity to hear from someone like yourself about your journey. In particular, what sort of attracted you to that sort of new view of safety? Where did that beginning come from?
Well, it's been not too long ago. I don't remember exactly the year. Must have been, maybe 3-4 years ago. I've always wanted to be an engineer, so let me start with that. So I got into engineering, electrical engineering. I got very little work done on that because I joined safety right away when I was an intern still. And I just fell in love with doing EHS. Well, safety at first, and then the whole 3 letters how we use in pharmaceuticals, so environment, health, and safety. And the reason I fell in love with it is because I saw how the projects we managed, how the things we did actually improved how people felt at work. So how they did their daily jobs, how it made it easier, more comfortable, or just safer for them. But I was always somewhat, I guess, dissatisfied with the way that safety was measured or tracked or reported. Everyone was always looking at the lost time rate or whatever you call it, anywhere in the world you are. And it felt like I was always hitting a wall, I'm a runner, so runners love that expression a lot, hit the wall. When you get to that mileage, you can't go further than that or faster than that pace. So I always felt like that. So whenever I could do more, I could try different things, but it never changed the actual rate, which was already quite low. And whenever something happened, it was a big issue, even though maybe for the worker it was nothing else, and it was nothing big. But then something almost happened, like a near miss. It could have killed someone, but no one got injured, so that's okay. Just write a report. So I was always had some. I always thought there must be something else. There must be a different way to do things. And then this guy comes along, and the company I was working for at the time, it's a pharmaceutical company. So his name is Urban Briere. He still is a mentor of mine. He was a vice president of the EHS. So he came along. He was, doing the tour, just checking in, getting to know the company, getting to know the people. And he came along with this different way of looking at safety. And he was the vice president. So his words might count for something. And I still remember the first official meeting I had with him, a face-to-face meeting. He was talking about that we should look at weak signals, that we should be talking to people, that we should be discussing the day-to-day work, and we should not be focusing on lost time incidents only. And I remember he looking at me and he said, "Oh, Rafael, you seem to be smiling. What's that about?" And I'm like, I don't know, but you just put into words what I was feeling inside, but I could never express. So it was really good to see that. So he started mentoring me, like officially mentoring me. He still is a good friend. I still look up to him. We both left the company now. And the first thing he told me was to read Todd's pre-accident investigations. And I still use a lot of the exercise that Todd proposes in the book. So I use count from 1 to 23. I always start my workshops with that. I use the Titanic story a lot when I'm trying to get into the new view. So and that just got the ball rolling. And here I am. I don't know, a few years later, a new company going through the same roads, and we developed quite a community in Brazil. So that's good. I've reached out. I've met a lot of people, and I'm sitting here doing this podcast with you. So it's taken me to good places.
Oh, okay, absolutely. And once again, I think the community in Brazil is doing such good work because it's having such good conversations as well. And, I think it's really important. And I think that's part of that secret sauce that we have, particularly with HOP and learning teams. It's just how to be curious and how to have better conversations. And I sort of sometimes wonder, is that skill, because it is a skill to have a good conversation, is it a skill that we've lost as safety people because we became so sort of technically focused?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I don't know if we've lost it. At least here in Brazil, I know for a fact that we don't develop it as part of our professional development, if you want to call it like that. We don't have a continuous development framework for EHS professionals here in Brazil, so that's one thing. Sometimes I see safety professionals being put in a pedestal, or either they get put there or they put themselves in there. Mm-hmm. So no, they're the officers. They have the badge, and they get people arrested. You might say, quote unquote. So I don't know, and one interesting thing that happened with COVID is that a lot of safety professionals were put in home office work, type work, in remote working, because they were not essential. They were not part of the operation. And it got me wondering, what happened there? Did we put ourselves in that situation that we're not part of operations, that we're actually just stopping operations and not making them happen? So I guess you can say that we lost the skill to make good conversation, and that's one of the things I was talking about before that I always got me dissatisfied with how safety was managed, because there was a lot of paper and not a lot of talking, and I love talking to people. I love being curious and understanding how they do their work, how they get by the day-to-day struggle, and we definitely need to develop that.
So out of interest, just a little theme there. So your safety people are now having to work from home. So can I ask the question, has the harm rates dramatically increased in your business because your safety people aren't present anymore?
Nope.
Wow.
Not at all.
What happened?
That's a surprise, isn't it?
Isn't it a surprise, isn't it?
Surprise.
So wearing that badge, not being able to have that badge, not being able to be present and watching people and correcting people when they get it wrong has made no difference.
No difference.
No difference.
I was developing workshops and trainings for people here. You get a lot of statistics from Sidney Decker, from Todd, all of these guys, and I said, okay, let's come up with our own numbers, because leaders, managers might see this as something, far removed from our scenario. So I was trying to find examples of bureaucracy, for example, in our own work. And I have a guy in my team. He's in the risk group, so he was put home for good reasons. He should have stayed. We wanted to keep him safe and healthy. He's now back to work. He got vaccinated. That's not the case. So there was this rule before I joined. So there was this rule that every new procedure or every procedure that got reviewed, no matter how little of it was reviewed, needed to be signed off by safety. So I said, okay, how many procedures have you reviewed in the last year? And it was, we were very good at controls. We had a spreadsheet with the number of the procedures that were reviewed, who reviewed them, and what type of inputs they put in. So surprise, surprise, out of 700 procedures, we had something to say, something really really interesting to say or to change in 1% of them.
Wow.
So that's 99% of inefficiency in that job. Just time thrown on the garbage.
Yeah, yet for people doing the work, for them to affect change, basically safety was the gatekeeper.
Yep.
So effectively they had to get the permission of safety to bring about change.
Exactly.
Which is really interesting because I've always thought, as a risk professional, I've always said to myself, part of the role of safety is around assurance.
Mm-hmm.
And we're providing assurance for not only for the business, we're providing assurance for the board of the company as well, the directors, and we're also providing assurance to the people that do the work.
Yeah.
And I think people can relate to what assurance means, because assurance can mean that we're wanting to know why things go right.
Mm-hmm.
And we're wanting to know how to improve things so that don't go wrong.
Yeah.
Because that's what assurance is about. Ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, and I understand why people want to focus on the negative. And I always say to people, if you could achieve zero harm, then what are you going to do next? If you create this paradox of no harm, what are you going to do next? Because the irony is, risk has to exist. Risk is part of the thing that actually helps to drive us. But there's healthy risk and there's unhealthy risk.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I've always asked the question, the potential for harm has to be present if risk is present. So if you don't want harm, you have to get rid of risk. But if we got rid of risk, we actually couldn't function. We couldn't do the work. Yeah. So we call it the paradox. We call it that paradox. It's an interesting situation. I think the difference here is if we think about risk in its true form, we're trying to reduce the amount of uncertainty that workers are having to face. Because if you think about it, when you assess risk, there's always something remaining. So if we put in a control, if we mitigate something, there's something left over.
Yeah.
And whatever left over,
or something different.
Yeah. And whatever is left over, the organisation is having to work out: are we accepting that? So we're accepting that whatever's left over is what we have to deal with, or are we having to tolerate what's left over? And to me, the difference here is accept means that we believe we can do no more. Tolerate means that we want to do more, and we're going to have a plan to work out how to do more as we go along. Yet whatever risk is left over, that's what workers face, not the organisation. Uncertainty is what workers face. So how do we help workers face uncertainty? Because you've already done your controls. So what's left over? And I think that's the interesting thing. And I'm really pleased that you talked about weak signals, because weak signals exist in the uncertainty. But I think the problem here is, how does an organisation get to see them? Because there's so much noise. Because there are lots of weak signals that make sense. There's lots of things that are happening all the time. How do we make sense of it? And I think that's the challenge. And I think that was one of the key themes at Eric Honagel's symposium the other week, was around that sort of weak signals. How do we make sense of it?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Well, look at it.
And it's interesting because when you talk about that with leadership, sometimes they think it's easy, right? They say, "Oh no, you just you make a choice." Yeah, that's easy for us here, sitting, on the blunt side. Telling people that no, you have the power to stop your job. They don't even. Sometimes they don't even know what's going to happen.
Look, we have the saying that workers want to be as effective and efficient as they can be.
Yeah.
I think organisations really overplay the fact that that workers can solve everything. I mean, workers want to solve what's within their own domain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
They're not managers. they're having to live with what they've got. And it's really interesting. We've been having these recent conversations. More and more leadership want workers to be problem solvers. So the issue there is that if we want all our workers to be problem solvers, then how does problem solving and reporting come together? Because if we create people to being these problem solvers, and I think problem solving really is a valuable skill for us to have, then why would I report anything? Because I'm always fixing something. Make sense? I'm fixing your problem.
That's interesting. I had a conversation the other day about that with my team. We used to have this near miss reporting system. I'll still do, but we sort of changed it now to a more of a communication system. So people, not just talk about near miss, but they have proposals, they have ideas, they can say it there. And it goes for environment things as well. So they have ideas on how to save energy or other things. And one of my guys was complaining that they just don't report it. They don't put it in the system. I'm like, okay, why would they put it? If they have the power to resolve it, no, they have a chair meeting, and in the chair meeting they talk to the mechanic, and the mechanic goes and solve it. So there you go. Why would you want to report that? How are we helping then? By reporting it.
Yeah, because we want to measure it.
We want to measure it. Yes.
We want to measure it. Yeah.
We want a nice chart going up and saying, oh, here's the number of near misses we have prevented.
Look at all these great ideas that have happened. Yeah, look, and I perfectly understand, because it's interesting. If you could imagine, I think both New Zealand and Australia have this thing called the regulator paradox. If the health and safety regulator achieves what they want to achieve, which is lowering harm rates, will that organisation then have less people? Does it need to have all these people? Does it make sense? And this is the issue with measurement, that we basically say that it's not acceptable that X number of people get hurt every year, and this is what we're doing to try and reduce that. Then if we do reduce that, do you need the same amount of resource for that? So I sometimes ask myself, is measurement part of that justification that organisations want or department want to justify their existence? Because people ask the question, well, why do you need all these people? And I think that's that paradox of switching it round to saying, why are people successful? And
that's what we're trying to do.
Yet things like lean and those things in quality have been doing that for 70, 80 years. If that makes sense. Because they've been focused on how to empower the work teams to self-improve.
Mm-hmm.
And how to get them to share those improvements, those stories with others. And I think that's an interesting question that you've raised, Rafael, because are we asking people to make judgment by asking them to report something? Or should we just be asking people to share their story? And it's really interesting. We did a podcast with Jeffrey Liff a little while ago, and we've got a new white paper coming out shortly about everyday learning. And we had this conversation about the 4 Ds. The 4 Ds.
Yep.
Dumb, different, difficult, dangerous.
I remember that.
Yeah. And it's just getting workers to reflect or think back about a situation that didn't make sense to them, or a situation that was different to what they'd normally encounter, or a situation that something they were doing was more difficult than it normally would be. And I think the ultimate goal there was not for workers to say what went well, what didn't go well, because that's all about judgment. Yep. It's simply about getting them to actually share that story and to think about when they encounter things, is it dumb, difficult, different, or dangerous? Because that concept in their head is what allows them to stand back and think about it, if that makes sense. And the more they can share, their story, the more that pattern in their head starts to happen.
Starts to come up, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, and it's interesting that they only connect the dangerous part to safety. So when it's different, dumb, or difficult, sometimes they don't connect it to safety. We're trying this new thing with leaders here, and getting them to go out and talk to people. Mm-hmm. And they one of the things is we ask them to talk to employees. So when is your work difficult? When is it frustrating? And sometimes and they come up with things. So it's been an important part of our journey here. So getting leaders to go out and talk. And when you say safety dialogues, they immediately think, well, let's get the whole shift together and talk about slips, trips, and falls. And no, you're gonna go down. You're gonna talk to one person, mm-hmm. and you're not finding risks. You're not trying to correct that person. You're not telling him to wear PPE. You just have a conversation, have a real conversation. Try to understand how the work is done. And one thing that we tell them is, do not correct people. Do not talk about what's not going well. Of course, if you see an immediate hazard, which you shouldn't, because employees usually know better. So get it sorted out afterwards, but get the conversation going on a more positive side. And then reflect on your learnings. Talk and let us know what you've learned. So we got two very interesting feedbacks, which were very recurrent. One is that has nothing to do with safety. So you've captured a lot of things, but that has nothing to do with safety, or not that has nothing to do with safety, but what has that to do with safety? So sometimes people struggle sometimes to make a connection of a job being frustrating to it being hazardous or to it leading to an incident. And the other one is that on the reflection side, we ask them open questions. So we ask them things like, what have you learned about the job? What can you do to improve the job? Where does the team need us? Or how does the team need leadership? And one very recurrent feedback was that it was hard to write it down. It was hard to answer those questions.
Yep.
Because they were in a mindset that let's just find risks and let's just report how many risks we found, how many things we corrected. And when we were reporting, we were showing the number of reflections, the recurrent themes, the things that people talked about to leadership. When you go one level up in leadership, they want actions. They want an action plan. They want to put down an action plan. That's it. And it's a long road. We're not through it yet, but it takes a lot of discussion and convincing and talking that maybe we won't have an action plan right now, and we have a lot of systems to track action plans. We have a lot of we have CAPAs, corrective actions, preventive actions. We have the near-miss reporting system. Let them do their job, and we will use them if we need it. Now it's time for something else. Now it's time to create trust with workers, so when they find those things, when they have those moments where they are uncertain, they can raise their hands because they trust that someone will talk to them and will support them. And it's time for us to learn.
And I think look, I agree, and it's natural for leadership to want to fix things because that's their job. That's what they do. That's what they get trained to do. I like to talk to leaders about understanding that there's this difference that when we're trying to manage risk, we're either trying to put things in place that are trying to control or mitigate the hazard and how it can cause harm, how it releases energy. Think about Todd and the sticky. You need that energy release. So we're trying to do that. And then we're also trying to do some things that are trying to influence the worker at the same time. And I always ask this question. It's fixable. I can fix the hazard. That the hazard is binary. So if there's an issue that, for instance, some piece of moving plant or equipment can strike or crush or release electricity or whatever the case may be, I can fix that because it's something that is physical. But with people, and I would argue this quite strongly with people, I don't think they're fixable. I think the answer here is they're understandable.
Yeah.
Because a person can change themselves. That's up to the person, and the person changes themselves through better knowing and better understanding and better perspectives. So is our job to help them to better understand rather than tell them what to do. Because I'm still waiting for that sign that says do not cross the line. I'm still waiting for that sign to actually do something. And it'd be really interesting that if we could put a metric on that sign to work out how it actually aids to success, if we put a metric on it and we monitored it, if we took the same approach now, we'd probably get rid of every single sign.
Yeah, well, Dave Provan and Drew Ray have quite an interesting podcast on that, warnings and signs for safety.
And I think what's useful, if I think about, I do quite a bit of work in safety around machinery because it has a lot of harm rates. If I think of the sign, I like to say that part of that signage, there's two parts to it. One is it's there to inform or make someone aware of something. And I think if the sign is there to inform them where the hazard is and the type of hazard, then that's great. It's useful to say that this is a crush point, or this is a shear point, and that stuff, or this is something that's really, really hot. That's okay, because that's simply telling us about the presence of something.
And sometimes you don't see it, so you need someone to tell.
Yeah. So and that's what that sign is there to do. Having a sign saying "Don't put your hand in" is different. So I think the question I always ask is, in machinery safety, we call these things complementary controls. Yep. They're there to complement something else.
Yes.
They're not there to be a control itself.
Yeah, you have the guard, you have the interlock, plus you have the wall.
Absolutely. I mean, I love a good machine where it's got the traffic light to say, green, orange, and red. Okay, and every machine has a traffic light. Okay, but what's really important is that when that machine changes its state, there needs to be something that tells someone the state has changed.
Yeah.
And that might be a buzzer, it might be a siren, it might be something else to simply tell something at that time the state has changed. Because everything is flashing. and if everything's flashing
and sometimes
I never see the flashing because it's always flashing.
It's always flashing. And it can be quite confusing, right? So is green like safe, or is green that operating?
I don't. Oh yeah. What does it mean?
What does it mean?
And that's why we have the saying, embrace the red, fear the green.
Fear the green. Yeah.
Okay. Because what does green mean?
Exactly.
For machinery, the machine is in its normal operating state. That doesn't mean it's safe. It just says it's in normal mode. Normal. But normal could be that it's still got an exposed blade that cut your fingers off.
You would never know.
You'll only find out once you
find out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Signs are an interesting thing. Here in Brazil, there's a law. So I need to think whether it's Brazil or some states. For a fact, in some states, you get to an elevator, any elevator, like a people elevator, and you go, you have the buttons. You want to go up or you want to go down, or to any floor. There's always this sign that says, "Make sure the elevator is in the floor you are at before you jump on it."
Wow.
And I'm like,
okay.
Yeah.
Is it what the door does or the gate in front does?
Exactly. And I was always curious about it because there's an actual law. There's a reference to a law.
Absolutely.
And the other day I found out. So I'm doing climbing now. So and I got this theoretical lessons before going up on the wall, going up on the rocks. And the teacher sent me a workbook for a lot of accidents that had happened in Rio de Janeiro. It's where I'm from. And there was this accident that happened in a hotel where a lady fell down on an elevator shaft. And that's why they passed out the law that you must have a sign in every elevator telling people to make sure the elevator is on the floor.
Wow. Rather than a gate that can't be opened.
Rather than get the gates and
on the floor. But look, it's no different. Yeah. How often do you see a door and the sign says push or pull?
Push or pull.
Yeah.
And I have actually seen guards on machines with both push and pull.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is that about?
On
the same door. So I got close to it and it was like push to close, pull to open.
Wow.
but it was
I
really,
always like
really
to say
small.
that if it's got a handle,
That's
if it's got a
pretty
handle,
clear.
it's a pull. If it's got a flat plate, it's a push. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. But no, look, and once again, I think, if we roll it back, all these things are designed to support people when they are curious. But if they're not curious, it has no meaning to them. And the sign's always there.
Yeah.
And how does the sign give context? So like we've been doing a piece of work recently where we're developing some metrics for the new view of safety.
Yeah.
But we're linking that need to be able to report an activity and how to link that activity to the narrative of the activity. Because the quantitative component is simply a measurement of a number, but behind that number is what gives its meaning.
Yeah.
So how do we link quantitative and qualitative together? So the example is we went out and we did we had 200 4D inputs for the month. Well, that's great. That's a number. That's an activity. Okay. And I can say, and compared to last month, we're up 20%. Okay. Or we're down 30%. That's just a number.
Yep.
But the meaning comes from what were the themes from those activities? What were the key things that were coming through from workers? How have those things changed over time? And in the new white paper coming out with Todd, we also explore the sentiment of what was said by the workers. So when we're capturing their stories, because the stories have to come from the workers using their own words, not the words that you write down, because you're writing down filtered information. We want the words from the people. But that story that they share with us, in that story, that sentiment tells us whether they're coping or not. So if the sentiment is positive, it would basically tell us that they're able to cope or deal with the current system. Okay, so the example there could be that the theme was a lack of resources, people are having to work with less people than before. And that's a classic one with COVID, isn't it? Okay,
Yep.
don't have the same size work teams.
Every day.
Yeah. But the language that they use, one work team, by expressing their language, is telling us that they're coping. Another work team, by the language they're using, will be telling us that they're not coping because their sentiment would be negative. So we're really interested in exploring not only what people say, but also how they say it. Because that story and that sentiment now gives us a whole different picture.
Yeah.
So linking the narrative, so linking the activity, the number of things, linking the narrative, and we call that, creating the themes of the weak signals is another thing, but also the sentiment of that is something else.
Now I'm anxious to read that paper.
Yeah, because
Really anxious to read it. Yeah.
Because we believe that those things could actually help us to look for the presence of capacity.
I'm sure you can. You've kind of just described what we are struggling to do with the safety dialogues that I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make sense of everything that's being said? So for example, for now we have over 250 of them, and I'm sure that 250 times leaders learned something or did something, and it was small increments, and they're all positive and everything.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's so much there that we could make sense and pick up the themes and patterns and things that we could be doing for the company as a whole.
And I think, and what we've found in the work that we've been doing, and we've been doing this for a year now, is that there's this thing we call it the forest from the trees. That as humans, it's difficult for us to stand back and see how things start to form patterns of occurrence, or just patterns of information. It's hard for us to do that.
Yeah,
it's no different. Everyone has a risk register, and in that risk register is something that's quite ugly, something that will kill you. Okay, and it's in there somewhere, but we can't see it because it's not been brought to our attention. So we call it forest or the trees. I can't stand back. I know there's a forest there somewhere, but I can't see it.
I see.
And that's where we think AI technology is very powerful to do that. And that's the stuff that we've been working on, is how to use AI technology to do that. If you think about what people like Amazon and Google is really good at, it's good at looking at the themes of what you enjoy and presenting content to you based on those things.
Yeah.
And they have mastered that.
Spend your money on that.
They have mastered it. Okay.
They do.
So for Todd, it's Tim Tams, a type of biscuit. He loves a good Tim Tam. Okay. Which we make down here, you see. So I'm about to send him a big box of Tim Tams for Christmas. But where machines aren't good, or where AI isn't good, where humans are really good, is humans are really good then at reading the narrative that sits behind those things. And humans are then good at making sense of that narrative. So I can say to you, Rafael, there have been, of these 200 things that workers have shared with us, there's this big theme about mask wearing coming through. And of that mask wearing, 40% of people are sharing the stories in a negative way. 60% are sharing the stories in a positive way. Then what you can do is that you can then look at some of that narrative of the negative and the positive. And as a human, you can make sense of that. AI can't. AI technology can't do that.
Yeah, correct.
And from that, and then once you see a theme, once you read the narrative that helps you understand that theme, then there's an opportunity for you to run a learning team to get in there and create better understanding. Because the improvement comes from the learning team. The improvement doesn't come from the data that's been presented to you. So I can't fix that. Like if it came back and said, 120 people have reported that mask wearing is a problem, management will say, we'll go out and fix it.
Get a warning out saying that you must wear a mask. Then that's done. Correct.
A new mandate. Let's put smiley faces on the front of the mask. Okay?
The front of the mask.
Yeah, the front of the mask, because the virus doesn't like a smiley face. It'll keep away from a smiley face. So a learning team then helps you to better understand why people feel that way, or why people don't have that same issue that other people have. And that learning team then gives us the power for us to share that story, and for workers to, through that notion of problem identification and problem understanding, that workers then actually start to solve the problem themselves. And once again, that if we want to call it a fix, that fix of self-improvement, you can measure that. Because you can go back to the group later on and ask them, did it work as intended? And if it didn't work as intended, then either improve it or remove it.
Thank you, listeners, for being part of this podcast. We would love to hear your learnings or other topics you would like us to explore about learning teams. Go to www.podcastlearnings.com and give us your feedback. Become part of the community of practice with learning teams. Go to www.learningteamscommunity.com. Support the authors of the Practice of Learning Teams. Purchase the book from Amazon.com or go to www.learningteamsbook.com for an inside look and other free book resources from the authors.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.